Thank you very much, everybody. It's really a wonderful honor to be here. You know, who would have thought that the Korean Americans would have the largest, most successful, most well-organized gathering of all the Asian groups in New York City, focused on community service. It's wonderful. Tribute to everybody. And I also want to recognize June and Sunny Huang, mostly because they're Dartmouth graduates, class of 1985. And I've known them since 1981, is it, Sunny? We met in 1982, because we were working on Asian student activities together, and we couldn't believe that there were these two Asians actually living in Hanover, New Hampshire at the time. So I give a lot of talks. Everywhere I go, I'm expected to make a speech. But I had to think long and hard about what I could tell this audience that might be meaningful. So what I did was I tried to think about what it would be like to just tell you my personal story. Now, it's very embarrassing to me. It's very embarrassing to me to talk about my life and my own history. I usually talk about problems in global health and such. But tonight, with this wonderful gathering of Korean Americans, I thought I'd go through a little bit of the way I think now as a college president about the opportunities I've had and the responsibilities for the future. You know, one of the books that I've really enjoyed reading recently, I don't get to read much anymore, but over the summer I read a little bit, Malcolm Gladwell and Outliers, a wonderful book that popularizes some of the most interesting research now on what it takes to be successful and what marks the most successful people in life, was following a pattern of books that had come out that said talent is overrated. It's really not about talent. And he writes this: everything we have learned says that success follows a predictable course. It's not the brightest who succeed, nor is success simply the sum of decisions and efforts we make on our own behalf. It is rather a gift. Outliers are those who have been given opportunities and who've had the strength and presence of mind to seize them. To build a better world, we need to replace the patchwork of lucky breaks and arbitrary advantages that today determine success, the fortunate birth dates and the happy accidents of history, with a society that provides opportunities for all. Now, isn't it wonderful that we're here tonight to support an organization who's trying to level the playing field and provide opportunities for all? But it also made me think a lot about the not just happy accidents, but the crazy, improbable circumstances that led to my being here today. This is my mother and father's wedding, right here in New York City. Talk about improbable. My father escaped from North Korea when he was 17, happened to know a border guard, so got through to the South. Without a penny to his name, he somehow got himself admitted to Seoul National University Dental School. He went to dental school, worked very hard to learn English, was taken in under their wing by some American dentists who sent him to New York University, right here, to do some postgraduate training. My mother was a student at Gyeonggi High School, did very well. During the war, had to walk from Seoul to Masan, where Gyeonggi High School was reconstituted. And then from war-torn Masan Gyeonggi High School, people from an organization called PEO, a secret women's society based in the United States, came to Masan and offered scholarships to exactly 2 women. She came to Scarrett College in Tennessee in the early 1950s, and out of sheer boredom in Tennessee, decided to go to a Korean party in New York. At that Korean party in New York, she ran into my father. My father was smitten. He sent letter after corny love letter to Tennessee. My mother, who's a very cerebral type, couldn't understand what the hell was wrong with this guy. But eventually, they continued their romance. My mother was, again, completely unexpectedly admitted to Union Theological Seminary here in New York City, where she studied with people like Reinhold Niebuhr and Paul Tillich, some of the greatest theologians and thinkers of the 1950s. And she and my father married in New York. So my brother was born here in New York City, but then, as students had to at that time, went back to Korea. Here I am at about 1.5 or 2 years old with my father, who taught at Seoul National University and Yonsei University Dental School. My mother taught philosophy and theology at Hihwa, and we thought we had a pretty good life. But what was happening around that scene? There were students in the streets. There were military conflicts. There was so much instability that my parents decided that the only chance that we would have to lead a normal, productive life might just be to come to the United States. So again, through the kindness of strangers, a dentist in Dallas, Texas, whom my father had met through the war, invited my father to come to Dallas. Now, he was a professor of dentistry, had gotten all his training, special training at New York University, but he had to start dental school from the first year all over again. And so we lived in a very, very small apartment while my father finished dental school. Then, because my father was afraid that a Korean dentist, that Americans would not accept someone from Korea putting his hands in their mouth, we ended up in Muscatine, Iowa. Now, don't be too impressed. We lost every single game our senior year. But I led the sort of classic Korean-American Iowan life growing up. And, you know, we learned what it's like to be in the middle, the heartland of the United States. But you can imagine, you know, at least the only good thing about being in Iowa at that time was that Kung Fu was on TV. And at least they had some fear that we might know karate. But it was a challenge. I did play football. I did play basketball. Was there racism? Sure. But the racism in Iowa was more like assaults on our dignity. They made fun of us. They, you know, taunted us to an extent. But my father was a dentist. My mother was finishing her PhD at the University of Iowa. And the racism that we experience is not like the racism that, for example, poor African Americans experienced in the South, and frankly still experience in the South sometime. It wasn't a racism mixed with classism that limited our opportunities. So how did I get from Muscatine, Iowa, to this crazy picture of me, President of Dartmouth College? Now, you know, my father was a dentist. Dentists are among the most practical human beings on the face of the earth. My mother was a philosopher, studied with Reinhold Niebuhr, and had us reading Martin Luther King and newspapers from New York City even when we were young kids. My father, I have to tell you, my first semester after I returned from Brown University, he picked me up at the airport and we were driving home, and he said to me, "So what are you thinking of studying?" And I told my father, you know, I'm really excited by philosophy and political science, and I'm really thinking of studying those two things, and I really want to go into politics. So we were on the highway, and he slowly pulled the car over to the side of the road. And, you know, I didn't speak Korean then, but if I had, he probably would have started his comments by saying, "Ya ima!" And he quite literally said, as calmly as he could, "Look, once you finish your residency, you can do anything you want."